I was halfway around the world, serving my country on deployment with the Air Force, when I got the kind of news no one ever expects. My neighbor back home sent me a shaky video and a message that just said, "I think they're tearing your house down." At first, I thought it had to be some kind of mistake. But there it was, bulldozers ripping through my property like it was just an empty lot. No warning, no permission, just gone. And the people behind it? My HOA. See? Before I left, everything was in order. I paid my dues, followed their rules, even went out of my way to stay on their good side. But for some reason, they decided my home was a nuisance. And while I was overseas with no way to fight back, they took matters into their own hands. It felt personal, cold, like they waited until I wasn't around to defend myself. The fee. Worst part? That house wasn't just bricks and wood. It was everything I had. Years of hard work, memories, even stuff from my dad who passed. And just like that, the HOA treated it like it didn't matter. I tried reaching out, tried to get answers, but they just gave me the runaround. Claimed they had the right. But the more I looked into it, the more it smelled like a power play. I didn't want revenge. I wanted justice. And justice came from a very unexpected place. My squadron. My Air Force family stood by me in a way I never could have imagined. And what happened next? Let's just say the HOA's fancy clubhouse, the pride of the neighborhood, met a very sudden and dramatic end. But not in the way you're thinking. Stick around, because this story is just getting started. Before I left for deployment, I had done everything right. Filed the paperwork, got approval for my landscaping, made sure the property was maintained. My house was in good shape, and I even had a neighbor checking in every now and then. Nothing out of line. That's what made it all so confusing. There was no letter, no call, no notice taped to the door. Just one day it was there, and the next it was rubble. I started digging. Between spotty Wi-Fi on base and the chaos of my job, it wasn't easy, but I managed to piece a few things together. Apparently, the HOA board had held a special vote about my property. They claimed my yard had weeds, that the structure was abandoned, and they used that as justification to demolish it. But here's the thing. They knew I was deployed. I had submitted official notice months before I left, along with emergency contact info. They couldn't have forgotten. That's when I realized this wasn't just some mix-up. Someone on that board had it out for me. I don't know if it was jealousy, power, or just a total lack of empathy. But the more I read, the more it felt personal. And my neighbors? Some were just as shocked as I was. A few told me the HOA had stopped sharing meeting notes and were making quick decisions without telling the rest of the community. It all smelled shady. Meanwhile, I was still thousands of miles away, stuck with nothing but emails and patchy phone calls. I reached out to a lawyer, but even that was slow. And with each passing day, the damage felt heavier. Not just to my house, but to everything I had worked for. That's when my crew on base caught wind of it, and what started as a few frustrated conversations turned into something much bigger, something I never saw coming. Word spread quickly on base. At first, it was just a few guys in my unit who were shocked by what happened. But then it hit a nerve, because a lot of them had stories too. Times they came back from deployment to fines, legal notices, or property issues caused by HOAs who didn't care or didn't want to wait. My situation wasn't just a fluke. It was part of a bigger pattern. That stirred something. Especially in the people who knew the stress of serving overseas while trying to keep a life running back home. One of my closest friends in the squadron, Ramirez, took it personally. His brother had gone through something similar a few years earlier, and the way he saw it, this wasn't just about my house. It was about respect. They don't get to act like you don't exist just because you're in uniform, he said. Others agreed. It wasn't just anger, it was disappointment. And the more we talked, the clearer it became that this HOA had crossed a line, and no one had held them accountable. Back in the neighborhood, things weren't exactly quiet either. A few neighbors started pushing back, asking the board for documentation, for meeting minutes, for proof of the decision to demolish my house. But the HOA got defensive. They started sending vague emails, locking residents out of meetings, even threatening fines to anyone who disrupted community harmony. That phrase kept coming up, like they were trying to cover their tracks by blaming everyone else. One neighbor, Mrs. Jennings, who had lived there for over 20 years, started collecting statements and photos. "This isn't how things used to be," she told me during one of our crackly calls. "Something's off with them." Between her, my crew, and the growing pile of unanswered questions, the pressure was starting to build. But what none of us knew yet was just how far the HOA would go to protect their version of the story. Back on base, things were boiling. The more my unit found out, the more fired up they got. We weren't talking about payback. We were talking about being seen, being respected. They couldn't believe that while I was overseas doing my job, risking my life, someone with a clipboard and a title back home decided my house didn't matter. And the deeper we looked into the HOA, the worse it got. There were whispers of shady property deals, rushed votes, and even a few homeowners who said they were pressured into silence. No one had solid proof yet, but the patterns were hard to ignore. Meanwhile, I got my hands on a copy of the so-called nuisance report the HOA used to justify the demolition. It was laughable. A couple photos of overgrown grass, a vague complaint about excessive mail, and some form I had never even seen before marked "final warning." All dated after I'd already left for deployment. The kicker? My emergency contact, my neighbor who was keeping an eye on the place, said no one from the HOA ever knocked or reached out. Not once. That's when something unexpected happened. One of the newer HOA board members, someone I'd never even met, sent an anonymous message. No name, just a short email. "You didn't deserve what happened. It wasn't unanimous. Some of us tried to stop it." That one line confirmed everything. There was disagreement, which meant someone pushed this through aggressively, and maybe even illegally. At the same time, my neighbor Mrs. Jennings had gathered enough signatures to force a community meeting. But just days before it was scheduled, the HOA canceled it, due to security concerns. That only made things worse. People started getting suspicious. One resident's tires got slashed. Someone else had a letter slipped under their door with no signature, warning them to mind their business. On my end, my squadron was quietly working on something. They said, "Let us handle it." I didn't ask questions, but from the way they were moving, I knew they weren't just talking. And whatever was coming next, it was going to turn everything upside down. Just when I thought things couldn't get more twisted, I got another email, this time from a real estate agent I'd never spoken to. She said she wanted to apologize for what happened to the house, and added, "I had no idea it belonged to someone on active duty." That line hit hard. How did she know it was demolished? And more importantly, why was a real estate agent involved at all? I asked her straight up, and after a long pause, she replied, "I was approached by someone from your HOA weeks before the demolition. They said the property would be cleared soon and that it might be listed as available." I just stared at the screen. So now it wasn't just about weeds or mail. It looked like someone was trying to clear the land for resale. Suddenly, it wasn't a misunderstanding. It was a setup. And not just against me, but potentially targeting others in the community too. Mrs. Jennings had been keeping tabs on sales in the neighborhood and confirmed it. 2 other properties had changed hands in the past 6 months under suspicious circumstances. Both were owned by older residents who had moved into assisted living, and both houses had been flagged by the HOA as unmaintained before being sold. Patterns were forming, and they weren't pretty. Back on base, my squadron had been working on something they called a statement. It wasn't physical. It was legal, strategic. They looped in military legal services and even contacted a local journalist who specialized in homeowners' rights. Suddenly, this wasn't just my fight. It was public. And that's when the HOA started scrambling. They sent me a formal letter claiming I had violated several codes, including abandoning the property and damaging neighborhood aesthetics. It was laughable, especially since the house had been destroyed by them. But the biggest shock came next. Ramirez, my buddy from the squadron, called me after hours. His voice was low. "Bro," he said, "you're not going to believe who's behind this. Someone high up in the HOA board? They've got a direct connection to the developer trying to buy up the land around your neighborhood." That changed everything. That phone call from Ramirez hit like a freight train. He'd done some digging, calling in a few favors from folks with access to public records and local government filings. Turned out the HOA board president, Mr. Wallace, the same guy who signed off on the demolition order, was tied to a development company quietly buying up properties in our area. He wasn't just running the HOA. He was flipping land for profit, and he'd been using HOA authority to pressure people out. My house? Just one piece of a bigger puzzle. With that connection in hand, everything moved fast. The legal team on? Base sent a formal request for records under the Service Members Civil Relief Act, something the HOA never expected. When they didn't respond, my lawyer went public. The local journalist picked up the story, and it exploded. Headlines like "Deployed Airman's Home Bulldozed by HOA" and "HOA Tied to Development Scheme Under Fire" started flooding the news feeds. Neighbors who had been too scared to speak out finally started sharing their own stories. The pressure was unbearable for the board, and then something I never thought I'd see. The HOA Clubhouse, that big fancy building they used for meetings and parties, was shut down. Not demolished, but condemned. Turns out the permits they used to build it were riddled with zoning violations. Someone had tipped off the county, and after a surprise inspection, the place was sealed off. Poetic, really. They bulldozed my home under false claims, and now their pride and joy stood locked and abandoned. But the twist? After all the dust settled, I got a quiet message from the same anonymous board member who had warned me earlier. "They're gone," it said, "but someone else will take their place. Be ready." I didn't know what that meant at first. But a month later, I found a flyer in the mail for a revitalization project, with my old address listed as a pending development site. That's when I realized, even after justice, the fight might not be over. That flyer was the final reminder that even when you win a battle, the bigger war doesn't always end. But this time, I wasn't alone. The story had spread far beyond our neighborhood. Veterans, groups, local officials, and even people from other states reached out. What happened to me opened up a conversation that needed to happen. A conversation about HOAs, property rights, and how easily power can be abused when no one's watching. The HOA board was forced to step down, and a temporary committee made up of actual residents was formed. Mrs. Jennings ended up leading it. She told me, "This community belongs to the people who live here, not to people looking to cash out on others' lives." And for the first time in months, I believed that maybe something good could grow from all this wreckage. As for the developer, they backed off, at least for now. With the media spotlight and legal threats stacking up, they quietly pulled their proposal. My land was still mine. No house on it anymore, but it was mine. And that meant something. My unit went back to business as usual, but those guys, they never let me feel like I was fighting this alone. Ramirez and I still joke about the time he accidentally dropped a stack of flyers outside the old clubhouse before it got shut down. Small things, but they meant everything. I won't pretend I got a perfect ending. I didn't get my house back. I didn't undo what happened. But I got truth. I got accountability. And I got the chance to speak up, for myself and for others. who might not have the voice or support I was lucky to have. Sometimes standing up doesn't mean winning everything. Sometimes it just means refusing to stay silent.